Hey, this is the Sony 24-240. It's not particularly good at any one thing, but it stands out as a very unique lens because it's one of the only ones that has such a wide focus range, going all the way from 24 to 240, a 10 times zoom range in one lens. And it's a pretty big lens. So I've been using the Sony a6100, that camera right there, for a few months now as part of the first step in my transition back to becoming a full-time Sony user, switching from Fujifilm. And if you haven't seen that last video explaining my reasons and the pros and cons so far in my journey, you can check out that video to learn more about why I'm doing so. While we wait on that A7S III to arrive, I've actually been building up my Sony lens kit. And so I'll begin sharing those lenses I've bought, the reasons for them, as well as why I think they're a good value for video shooters. Even though there are a ton of other videos on this lens, none of them really review it from the perspective of a videographer. Before we get into the details and where I'll share the pros and cons using this lens so far for the past couple of weeks, let's check out this quick video sequence I created shooting downtown the other day, going from kind of low light to sunset to nighttime shooting, where we can showcase its focal range, stabilization, and some of its low light performance as well. Chances are, if you're getting this, you're not packing a lot of other gear with you. So that means you're probably not going to be taking a monopod or tripod for the majority of your shooting with this. When you really begin to zoom in on this, that's where you're going to notice a lot more shaky footage, which is to be expected. With a lot of those shots, I'm trying to hold the camera as still as possible, but the fact that the a6100 doesn't have IBIS means that the lens can only do so much for you. That said, the OSS in the lens does allow you to more easily capture those pans and tilts if that's something you want to do. The main reason I picked this up is very similar to when I had the XF 18-135 Fuji. That is one of the few lenses that you can get that can go from really wide to really telephoto in one lens. Similar to that lens, I mean, it's not going to be good in low light and you're not going to be getting the best shallow depth of field, but it's stellar for just keeping one lens on your camera and walking around town or doing a variety of different shoots where you know you need to go really quickly from a wide angle shot to a really telephoto shot. If you want to learn more about this lens or check out any of the other gear that I use to make these videos, you can check out my gear info down below. Let's start by quickly looking at its key specs. So yes, this is a full frame lens. And you might be thinking, well, you have an a6100. Well, like I said earlier, I'm getting the a7S III as my A camera. So the thought process behind that is I only want to have one set of lenses that can work interchangeably between the two cameras really easily. I don't want to have APS-C lenses, which are great on the a6100, but if I want to use them on the a7S III, I can't do so. So of course, for full frame, it goes from 24 to 240. That's equivalent on APS-C from 36 to 360. At about 780 grams, this is a pretty heavy lens. In fact, it's heavier than the a6100. Its variable f3.5 to 6.3 means that its widest is actually not that that bad. However, once you go into that telephoto range, it's definitely going to suffer in the low light department. A big pro, however, and a big deciding factor for me in getting this lens is the fact that it has OSS, which, especially when you're at the longer range of this lens, is going to be especially handy regardless. But when you don't have IBIS at all in your camera, like this a6100 and a lot of other Sony cameras, it's extremely helpful to have this because even like I said, and I showed in those examples, when you're holding this as steady as possible, every micro jitter is just magnified. In videos, especially if you're going to be using this handheld, you want to minimize and smooth out those motions and that shakiness. The con, however, is that the minimum focus distance is 1.64 feet, and that goes all the way up to 2.63 feet at the longer range. I haven't yet encountered a situation where I needed to get that close to a subject, but I would imagine for certain macro shooters, that could potentially be an issue. And I would say the last main spec that's actually worth mentioning is the fact that this has dust and moisture resistance. And while this isn't completely weather sealed, it still gives you that extra peace of mind if you're shooting out in certain conditions. There really aren't any full frame competitors to this lens. The only one that kind of comes close is that Tamron 28-200, which goes for about $730 new. I did do a lot of research between the two lenses, and the Tamron did look appealing because it was newer and had a couple things going for it, which I'll quickly discuss. The main pro for the Tamron is that it's f2.8 to f5.6, allowing it to let in more light and produce better subject separation as well. Size and weight wise, they were about the same. I think the Tamron was just a hair bit larger. On their site, Tamron says it has moisture resistance, but it doesn't mention anything about dust. So that might mean that the Sony is a little bit more resilient to the elements. In all the comparisons I've seen, the Tamron seems to be optically better overall. Most noticeably, I think corner sharpness is a big downfall for the Sony, especially when you're looking at stills and if you're a pixel peeper. Likewise, its minimum focus distance is 7.5 inches to 31.5 inches when fully zoomed out. Now that Tamron 28-200 is definitely a shorter zoom range compared to 24, which is wider, and 240, which is more telephoto. So you can cover a bit more with the Sony. I think its Achilles heel, and the thing that kind of helped me decide again to go with the Sony, is the fact that the Tamron doesn't have any kind of stabilization. I was able to get the Sony for $499 before taxes. Still not the cheapest lens, but when you consider what Sony's native lenses cost right now, that's a pretty good price, especially that this still goes for about $1,000 brand new. When you look at the negative reviews for this lens, I think the biggest thing I've noticed is that most of them are coming from photographers or people who are buying this at full brand new price of $1,000. The main concerns with them is that they don't really think that the quality and sharpness that they're getting out of this lens is justified at its price point of $1,000. But that brings me to two really important points right here, and that can kind of summarize the point of this video. The first is, no, don't pay full price for this. I think $1,000 is a lot for this lens for, again, the lack of sharpness that you get, especially when you're more of a photographer. For video, maybe you can get by it, and the convenience factor that this offers is worth it. But if you're a photographer, a pixel peeper, or someone who needs the absolute sharpest quality at this price, you can get much better looking elsewhere. So if you're more of a photographer, I would say going for the Tamron for just about $120 more might be a better option for you if you don't mind losing out on the 24-28 as well as the 200-240 focal range. So with that, who is this lens best suited for? Well, I think it's for someone who, again, is looking for convenience, versatility, and again, having one lens that you don't have to switch off that can cover a wide range of wide to really telephoto subjects. So instead, I'd say this is a better lens for someone who is prioritizing versatility, convenience, and in a sense, portability and compactness, because this one lens is essentially doing the job of maybe 2 or 3 other lenses. Understand that this will not be as good in low light, nor will it be as sharp. But honestly, if it were, I mean, this wouldn't just cost $1,000. Like, say this was like an f2.4, f2.8. You know, this would probably be something that would cost maybe $2,000, $3,000, maybe even $4,000. As far as cons go from my personal experience, the only real ones I could find so far when shooting videos are, again, low light performance, not that great. Especially at f6.3 when it's super telephoto, you're gonna have to really crank up your ISO. Again, if you're able to bump up your ISO, or you don't mind getting a little bit creative with your shots, maybe using a neon sign, some of the street lights, if you're in like a city, for example, like I am, it's not actually that bad, and I think some of the results you can get are actually pretty cool and usable. But the more noticeable thing to me is that it's not very fast at focusing, especially at those telephoto distances. Even with perfectly good lighting, I noticed it was more apparent. I noticed, for example, when I was trying to focus on some of the trains off in the distance, and I was trying to focus on the text of the trains passing by. Those trains weren't like passing by like really quick, as you saw. But in a lot of those circumstances, I was actually switching over to manual focus just because it seemed to hunt and breathe just a little bit, where it just wasn't too sure what to focus on. I have yet to use this for any of my client projects yet. I'm mostly a wedding filmmaker right now, and I do some short commercials. I had great results using that other lens, the 18-135, for similar use cases that I think I will for this. It's especially handy for fast-paced scenes that are changing really quickly. For example, you're going from the wedding entrances to crowd shots to first dances to maybe speeches and things like that. Something that you have on your B camera on a tripod that you can't really move around too quickly, especially when you're roaming with your A camera on like a gimbal or something. You just want to be able to quickly walk or run over to that B camera on the tripod, quickly switch up its framing, and you have the ability to do so much easier with a lens like this. There is no perfect camera body, there is no perfect lens, but you can get a lens that kind of suits your style of shooting much better. Much like a lot of other things in life, you're gonna have to deal with some drawbacks and perhaps some issues in order to get those conveniences or other unique features that a lens like this offers. Being that I try to minimize the amount of gear that I have, and I try to be a bit more streamlined with the way I shoot and the amount of gear I carry, this lens works perfectly for me, and it might for you as well, again, if you understand some of those downsides to it. So be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you found this to be a good one and you want to learn more about my other gear and tech reviews coming up. And until the next one, as always,